All right, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever it is you are in the world. My name is Matthew McMillan. I'm the president of BuzzMaker. You can learn more about us at buzzmaker.net. We are a full-service public affairs, public relations, government relations, and political consultancy with offices in the United States and in the Caribbean. And today's panel, we're going to be focusing on democracy issues, advocacy, public affairs, government relations, and political campaigns in the islands, primarily focused on the Caribbean, given the experience of our panelists, but we're going to be looking at island democracies and advocacy trends around the world. So we've noticed it's been quite a year for democracy issues, advocacy, and public affairs in the islands. Thus far in 2020 alone, in the Caribbean alone, we've seen elections in St. Kitts and Nevis, Guyana, the Dominican Republic, Anguilla, Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, and Jamaica. And we have upcoming elections in the next few months in Bermuda, Puerto Rico, Turks and Caicos Islands, likely St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and possibly St. Lucia and the Cayman Islands. But not to forget others around the world. In the Pacific, we've seen elections in Tuvalu, Vanuatu, Kiribati, and in Tasmania, off the coast of Australia. We also have elections coming up in New Zealand and Palau. And in the Indian Ocean, coming up soon, we have elections in the Seychelles. So joining us, we have a distinguished panel of public affairs, issue advocacy, government relations, and political professionals from primarily the Caribbean that will talk about trends in their countries, but as well best practices for advocacy and politics and issues and government relations. So I'd first like to introduce Pedro Valle. He's a political consultant and public affairs strategist with 303.digital in San Juan, Puerto Rico. There's been a lot of interesting news out of Puerto Rico lately. We had a governor deposed after the biggest protests we've seen in the island in generations. We've seen an electoral crisis just a couple of weeks ago where they tried to run a primary and they ran out of ballots and then they had to go a week later. Can you kind of give us, and of course we've had the devastating hurricanes and the impacts of the hurricanes in Puerto Rico. Can you maybe give us a broad understanding of where things are today after all of that, and what's going on in the political situation in the lead up to the November elections?
How much time would we have? Because this is a long story. Like you said, we had a recent crisis with the primaries where we basically had no ballots, and we had to reschedule the primaries for the next week. This last 3.5 years in Puerto Rico, the government has been the most inefficient government we've had in generations. Like you said, we elected a governor with no experience and no experience at all, not only in politics, he had no experience professionally. And then a crisis came out with a chat, and which kind of evolved from the whole Maria mismanagement by all areas of government mismanaged Maria horribly. So then we had the protests last year, which were, like you said, the biggest protests we have had, I think, ever, at least from what I can remember. And then what happened recently was that the current governing party changed the electoral law a couple of months before the primaries. So all the people that were there that had the experience to run a primary were fired. So we had a new influx of people that had no idea what they were doing. So that what that caused is that we had enough ballots weren't printed. There was not enough organization to get the election materials to the electoral colleges, and it was a big thing. Like I hadn't seen anything quite like this. As it stands right now, we still don't know really when the election is going to take place, because constitutionally we don't have a specific date. We usually have the elections the same date as the United States, but according to our constitution, the election should be in November. It doesn't have a date. But since the primary debacle was so, it took us so long to resolve the primaries, we still can't. There's still candidates that are still counting votes. We don't know if the primaries, the elections are going to be that Tuesday. They might be postponed a couple of
And
weeks
so
later.
how does all of this political kind of, upheaval and, really incompetence, how does that, sort with the corporate sector and the private sector? Are people losing confidence in Puerto Rico because they see, all these problems from the hurricane, which is not, your fault, but to also all of the political uncertainty? Is that leading to compounding economic problems, the economic problems that already exist?
Yeah, definitely. But this is nothing new. We've seen it happen last decade. There's a mistrust of the government and things like basic things like utilities, or power authority is has issues, and like right now it's raining, and I don't know if I'm gonna have power for the rest of this meeting. So yes, there's a mistrust of the utilities and the government and all that process that does have an effect on the economy. But right now with the pandemic happening, there's a bit of hope in terms of the pharmaceutical industry, which used to be a huge part of our economy. And now with the pandemic happening, there's a need now for pharmaceutical products to be produced inside U.S. territory. So there's hope that we can, offer those services, those industries, that space they need to produce things. Like that couple of weeks ago, there was a contract announced for the fabrication of swabs for testing here in Puerto Rico. So we're hopeful that's going to help us bring back the pharmaceutical industry that we lost at the beginning of the 21st century.
Interesting. I want to bring now Victor into the conversation. Victor Richardson is the Senior Vice President with BuzzMaker. He's based in Antigua, but often, as he says, based out of his suitcase, wherever he might be in the world. And he's been involved in literally dozens of island elections all around the world. But I really wanted him to hone in on telling us just a little bit of generalities about a very interesting election this year that took up many months of intrigue, and that was the Guyanese election and what followed. Maybe Victor, you could give people a sense of just kind of the basic 101 of what happened in Guyana, what was the crisis all about, and how was it ultimately resolved?
Well, the Guyana elections took place officially on, I believe, the 2nd of March of this year, 2020. And I don't believe the president was sworn in until, I believe, late August. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And in that intervening time, what was happening was basically a battle between an entrenched incumbent who maintained a grip on power, battling against an opposition who, by most counts, and certainly by members of the international and regional communities, had won an election by in excess of 15,000 votes. What happened in those intervening months was a test not only of democracy, but in the region's response to an attack or a perceived attack on democracy. It tested institutions such as, CARICOM and the OECS. It tested institutions such as the recently formed Caribbean Court of Justice, which was seen by many as a replacement for the Privy Council in London. It certainly tested the faith and strength of the Guyanese people. But I think at the end of the day, democracy won in Guyana, and what emerged is a government with many challenges, but one that is seen by a large majority of the electorate to be legitimate. And right now, I anticipate that they're getting down to the business of enacting those programs and policies that they promised.
I think those are some very important points about testing Caribbean institutions, because so many Caribbean institutions were involved in the controversies that happened. Like you said, CARICOM, the Caribbean Court of Justice, which if things had not if the Caribbean Court of Justice had not been paid attention to, then that could have really undermined faith in those institutions. So I think in general, perhaps this situation could be read as strengthening the CARICOM and strengthening the Caribbean Court of Justice in the long run. Now, what do you see happening next in Guyana? You know, obviously it's one of the fastest growing economies in the world. It has one of the largest oil finds of this century, really. What happens next, especially for those, you know, that might be on, you know, watching, that might be interested in things like sustainable development, environmental protection, and opportunities to get involved in a country with a massive growth opportunities in, you know, a number of sectors from agriculture to energy to telecommunications and others?
Well, certainly I think it's common knowledge by now that Guyana is certainly poised to be one of the fastest growing areas, not only in the Caribbean, but on Earth, you know, possibly, for its abundance of natural resources and also for its untapped and undiscovered potential. I certainly think that the election that has just be fought, because the Guyanese people and the Guyanese political elites understand that the government that forms this government going forward is going to, you know, certainly have deciding role to play in what happens with these newfound value addeds to the Guyanese economy. I think that's why both sides, will be then opposition and the then government, you know, put all their hopes on the line in order to retain power in a country that's, you know, could possibly be providing energy to the rest of the Caribbean, certainly providing other natural resources globally. And the opportunities for people who are overwhelmingly descending on Guyana and trying to, as it were, get a slice of the Guyanese pie. How they interface with these governments and in what capacity, what services they bring, how they bring positive contributions and benefits to the Guyanese people, who, let us be clear, are and should be the real beneficiaries of whatever economic revolution is about to take place in Guyana. They repeat the mistake of their neighbors in Trinidad, who, when they had their golden years from oil discovery back in the 80s, you know, could have possibly invested more in infrastructural development, public services, and a general public safety net that would have lasted even into today. So I think the Guyanese government and the Guyanese people will be best served by a government that balances both their domestic need with the aspirations and goals of those members of the international community who want to come and do business there.
I want to bring Javon Schudiger into the conversation now. Jevan is one of the Caribbean's top advertising professionals and the founder of Red Advertising and Marketing, based out of Barbados, also with offices in Trinidad and Tobago. Barbados has been relatively politically stable of late, since a literal landslide 30-0 victory for Mia Mottley and the Barbados Labour Party in 2018. But, you know, I know that historically, over the last decade or two, Barbados's economy has been in a long, slow slump. I want to know, you know, in the last 2 years since the election, how is the economy looking in Barbados these days?
I mean, in terms of what we have, I mean, in terms of Mia Mottley's government, came in on a wave of 30-0. So basically, there was no opposition. One member of the party defected and formed an opposition of one. And so that is a surfeit of confidence in this government. What's hit now is really, with COVID coming in, is a real tester, because the government had gone from had replaced an opposition, now an opposition that is seen as incompetent, perhaps corrupt, and had taken borrowing from I think 76% of GDP right up to 176% of GDP, And under the Motley administration, they would manage to get that back under control and were seen as the darlings of the IMF in the region, in that they had brought back the borrowing to, I think, 113% of GDP. Now with COVID coming in, our challenges are not really health challenges because we're fairly low in terms of the exposure to that, but the economic challenges that we're now facing have meant that this government is going to be tested and has so far done well, but we're coming to crunch time because a lot of unemployment is now running out of the ability for those people to claim unemployment benefits. And many of the private sector companies don't have the means or the desire to rehire them. So that there's going to be a little bit of a crunch time when people who have been looked after so far are going to be struggling to see where they're getting things. Now, we have done some wise things in that. I think they've tried to take the first steps towards redefining tourism. A tropical small island state with beautiful beaches. I mean, we've been selling 2 weeks on the beach since probably the 1950s or something like that. That hasn't really changed. And now with COVID, all bets are off on that. So what we've tried to do, and I think Barbados is one of the first to come out with it, was to say we don't want people really to be buying into holidays, but we want them really to buy into lifestyle, so that people can come here and work from home, which now is Barbados, not necessarily in your home city or even where your corporation is based, but work from Barbados for up to a year. And most recently, I think yesterday, Mayor Motley was saying that maybe it could even be extended beyond the year into a more permanent arrangement. So we're starting to redefine, and the government is starting to redefine opportunities to replace tourism, because our economy is really suffering under tourism. I think we're now starting to open back the economy, and with predictions that we can get by the end of the year, maybe 25 to 50% of what we had before. I think those are optimistic assumptions, but simply it's starting to come back, and the issue is going to be employment. So I think the government has started to make moves towards looking at alternative sources, but they're not going to be as easy to find as some people believe.
And how about the investment climate right now? Are people looking at this kind of rebranding and redefinition of the tourism product and seeing new opportunities?
I think in terms of there has been in terms of high net worth people, a run almost on our existing villa type properties, where people realize that in terms of lockdowns and in terms of going forward, Barbados handled things relatively well, didn't close its borders completely like some other islands, and that generally it's probably better to be locked down in a villa than it is in an apartment in New York or London or somewhere like that. So we saw an initial surge in activity on the property market. In terms of the corporations, we've been seeing a flight from corporations from here because of past history to do with where our ratings from Moody's or any of them. Most recently, I see that IMF gave us a passing grade, but AM Best, for example, gave us a risky grade, which means insurance companies and stuff, some of them have already started moving their domiciles away from Barbados because of that. Now, we've been fighting to fix some of these issues, and some of them are not entirely fair how the rating system works these days. But I think what we're not seeing is an influx of people looking right now for investment. It's almost a wait and see. Property market is starting to go. We had about 3 or 4 major hotel infrastructure projects sign up recently. One of them, because the banking funding suddenly got cold feet because of COVID and tourism. So one of them is now up for sale again, in terms of trying to find the funding. So we're having a difficult time there. In terms of what's interesting around this time is the availability of talent on the island that we don't normally have, because a lot of talent that works abroad has come home and is not able to go back out as well as that. So there's a lot of good talent around. What we are looking for, though, is creating quality job opportunities and looking at investment opportunities to come in there. The clients I have and the regional clients that have money are taking opportunities to buy into sectors, looking up to see where they're saying, but it really there's a certain fire sale mentality going on as well, that people with the cash to do it are looking for who's in trouble and who can I buy now. So they're looking to buy market share. And that's interesting in itself, but it's not really showing a huge confidence with external coming in yet. I think Barbados, certainly in terms of Mayor Motley, has done a good job to put us on the map, particularly with the island thing, and we've been on all the major news channels around the world, and we're starting to see interest pick up in an island, and again, an island where lifestyle is what you're buying into rather than anything else.
I'd finally like to bring in Alexa Lightborne into the conversation. She is based in Bermuda and is literally in the middle of an election campaign where she's serving as campaign manager for the Bermuda Progressive Labor Party. How is campaign going during COVID? You know, everybody, you know, we're in the age of physical distancing and, you know, a lot of fear out there in the community. How are you all adopting as a political party to this COVID environment?
Thank you, Matt. I think definitely we've had to redefine how we engage with our voters. You know, typically every campaign the strength is on engaging with your voters, engaging with those constituents, knocking on doors. And we really had to revisit that and operate within COVID regulations and COVID guidelines so that we're protected as a party, but simultaneously protecting the voters and the constituents. So we've really just ensured that the candidates are following social guidance in terms of knocking and wearing masks is very much a part of our day-to-day engagement. You know, while typically we would have had a physical rally, we are in the midst of planning a virtual rally where we can still, you know, share our platform, share our message, but in a different way. So we really had to kind of reinvent the way that we engage with voters, hear their concerns, and just show that we are still engaged with them, but just in a different way. I think the strength of our campaign in particular has been, you know, our successful COVID response and that we acted swiftly. And so the campaign has to be similar in that it's protective of you know, the voters and their safety and ensuring that no matter what we do, we're still engaging, we're still sharing our message, but of course protecting and having those types of safety measures in place.
And how is the electoral office responding to all of this? You know, how are they able to make sure that and ensure that there's a safe voting environment for people?
So what they're doing is they have kind of increased the number of locations, so polling locations. They have expanded advanced polling for, instead of it just being a day, it's now a week. So typically, you know, you may have a long line for one day on an advanced poll, which would be persons who, you know, will be traveling or have any sort of reason why they may not be able to come to the polls on the actual election day. So those are some of the provisions that they've put in place in addition to, you know, safety measures in terms of PPE equipment. They'll also be having those in order to, you know, protect the voters that do come in. Lots of cleanliness and, you know, washing and changing of pens. All these types of things are also now becoming common practice as it relates to voting in this environment.
And so what other sort of opportunities are you seeing from COVID in terms of, like, you know, changing the way people think, you know, or is it, you know, less like rallies and things and more digital, or what are some of the opportunities?
Digital. Yeah, definitely digital. I think we have relied on, you know, messaging and sending our messages in different ways. So as I said, typically, you know, you may knock on doors, you may give a pamphlet, but now we're relying on the virtual environment, using digital advertisement space a lot more to get our message across. You know, whereas we may have, you know, had a limited number of ads, we are increasing that during this current environment. And so, you know, we've realized in the strength of having such a huge digital presence is really what's been the strength of our campaign in getting our message out there in a succinct and clear way.
So I want to make sure that we're opening it up to the floor. So, you know, I'm both in the Pathable as well as in the Zoom chat we are monitoring. And so I've got a number of questions, but I also wanted to open it up. We have a question from one of our attendees here. And I'm going to put this over to Victor since he was talking about Guyana. And that was, what role did the Commonwealth election observers play in Guyana? And is there a prospect of a Chavez-style support for the region like the Petro Carib out of Guyana?
Observers, certainly for conscience, choir of conscience.
Looks like it might be
this challenge to a successful resolution. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you broke up for a quick second, but just maybe start again.
Okay, yeah, so I think they acted as the conscience for this whole process. And also they gave regional leaders, Caribbean leaders are traditionally very reluctant to involve themselves into the affairs of other neighboring countries. So these international organizations, these collective institutions gave leaders a buffer so that they can pursue the ideals of democracy while not opening themselves and their countries up to direct attack themselves. Case of the former Barbados Arthur, may his soul rest in peace, and Mia Motley when she was in charge of CARICOM.
Looks like we're having some problems with Victor, but I'm going to go ahead and make a comment here. I do think that there is a possibility in terms of the second part of the question that Guyana can use its oil surplus. Now, Trinidad and Tobago, when it was flying high on oil, also used that as an opportunity to exert regional influence. And I do see there is potentially an opportunity for Guyana, but I think that we really have to look at the oil deals that that the Guyanese government has signed. A lot of them, you know, it's more of an extractive relationship where, you know, there's not really going to be terribly much refining, at least under these initial agreements that's to be had right now in Guyana. And so it's more of that there's a tax benefit, or there's a benefit to the budget of the government of Guyana, but they're not going to be at this point developing as much of a local economy, but that could change. I mean, we're very much in early days. There's still a lot of discoveries happening in the Stabroek block. So I do think that there are possibilities for the oil sector to develop into a more robust local sector than we've seen elsewhere. So I think we have a question for Alexa here. Can Alexa comment on access to digital in Bermuda? Does almost everyone have digital in Bermuda?
So technology is a commonplace. So people usually have, you know, cell phones, etc. So I guess the question is more in terms of digital content, like on social media, etc. I guess. Yeah, definitely. So social media is something that everyone pretty much uses in Bermuda. So we're using Instagram, we're using YouTube. We have our first virtual rally coming up this weekend. And so we're going to basically be streaming on all of the platforms. And so getting that engagement, I think we've seen, you know, up to 30 and 40% of our population logging in at one point for some of our previous events. And so we're anticipating similar numbers as well.
And I believe data costs are fairly high, but also Bermuda does have a higher per capita GDP than many islands elsewhere in the world. So we have another question, and maybe Javon, you might want to jump in on this one. Can you address the issue of citizenship by investment and some of the questionable projects in various islands?
I think, I mean, in terms of, obviously it's an area that has run into some controversy, I think, because of the screening processes not always being implemented well enough. I think we have a number of islands in North, and I wouldn't be naming islands, where it was seen as you could come from anywhere once you invested enough money, and was attracting probably undesirables or people who are hiding from other jurisdictions. I think what I'm looking at the latest iterations of that, and I'm thinking about Barbados now, where it's not only a money transaction, it's not just what money you're coming into, it's about whether you're going to be part of the society, are you going to invest properly, and also what are your means, so that putting $100,000, which I think in the past tended to be enough to buy citizenship of certain islands, is not as much on the cards anymore because of some of the incidents that's happened with people coming from war-torn countries or people coming from with the benefits of corruption, trying to find new ways to circumvent the system. I think a lot of the islands that were first out of the blocks in that and saw that as a good place of income have now realized that that costs them in terms of their reputations and also the wrong type of people. And it put their citizens at risk in terms of their freedoms to travel, freedoms to move around as well. So I think the next phase of it and again, stay for a year, maybe you can stay longer. And the type of screening, I think for Barbados, has probably had about 3,000 applications, but I've only approved 12 so far. So I mean, that's significant in that we want people to come in, but we're going through the correct process. It's taking longer than people would like, because everybody would like to access the rentals that come with that, the car rentals and everything. But I think the Caribbean in particular has learned that if you open your doors with citizenship by investment, nothing's wrong with that, but you must have the right checks and balances so that you can screen out undesirables and you can make sure that your citizens aren't in the end disadvantaged by losing their access to the rest of the world.
Yeah, I want to make a comment on this, and I know Victor has strong opinions on it as well. One of the things I think that's important, and one of the problems that the Caribbean at least has, and other island economies as well, is that you tend to have all the states start competing with each other, right? So on the same with tourism. So you had, one island would offer, this product, and another island would offer the same product, and then you start to get the same product offering island to island. So what that did was that competition then drove down the value proposition of the offering. So one of the things I think that you're seeing now is that there's a price war going on for between the various countries, and the people that are winning are not necessarily the people of the countries or the countries themselves, but the citizen investors, if you will, that are going to benefit from this price competition that's already driving the price down. I think Dominica is now down. It used to be $250,000 when St. Kitts and Nevis first started the program in 1995, and now Dominica is in the 5 figures. You can get a Dominican passport for. And so what's happening is you're seeing you're lowering, the competition is lowering the price, but it's also encouraging islands who have gotten kind of addicted to the revenue. You're seeing them start to relax their standards in terms of who they let in, and that's a real caution, especially as we look forward. I know that one of the countries in the region used to have visa-free access to Canada, and now because of these issues, we're not seeing that anymore. But Victor, did you want to make a comment?
Well, the tradition of Caribbean nations borrowing ideas from each other and then having to compete with each other over those very same ideas continues. You need only remember the Constitution was largely written by the civil servants at Whitehall. And then that Constitution and variants of it was shared up and down the Caribbean chain. And most of the vestiges of that, Constitution exists to this day. COVID has, forced in a major way a lot of Caribbean countries to these institutions into images of their own. Can no longer the arrangements, the legal arrangements that.
Yeah, it looks like, Victor, we're having some connectivity issues. Maybe if you shut off your video, that might work. But we actually have a kind of a follow-on question to that, which is there any hope that there will be a unified Caribbean screening of potential investors? I haven't heard of, CARICOM even speaking about that. I don't know, Jevan, have you heard of anything where the CBIs work together?
I think apart from CARICOM, we have, as Victor said, we have a history of competing with each other. I think this would lead, not to there. And again, the whole idea of citizenship by investment is not exactly owned by the Caribbean, but unfortunately, small island states are often the cheapest entry point that you can get, so that we attract sometimes the wrong people. But certainly, North American countries and European countries have had citizenship by investment at probably a higher level, but it has been there. I think our issue is really about screening to make sure that people that we are giving passports to actually want to contribute to the society we have and don't come with any hidden baggage that would embarrass, our own citizens elsewhere. But I mean, I think the problem is going to be internal competition between the islands, that they're not going to agree because everybody wants a bigger share of that pie.
And one quick point, like while other developed nations do offer citizen by investment programs, of their economies that impacts is relatively small when compared to most Caribbean countries who pursue this. So that's why in our especially important that we discuss that.
I think the other issue is sometimes our passports can be seen as a flag of convenience, you know, because we have had traditionally good access into the developed world. And unfortunately, I think what some of these people have been doing, instead of coming to invest and live in the Caribbean, they've just been buying a passport to move around with because their existing passport doesn't carry the rights that ours might be. And I think that's part of the problem that we're encountering. And we have to be more careful in how we're screening those kind of people out so that we know that they're positive actors rather than just people who want to take advantage of easy access into, you know, probably the Commonwealth and North America.
So I want to bring Pedro into the conversation with a question about how, if you're a citizen activist and a citizen activist group, let's say working on something like climate change or one of these other pressing global issues, how does engaging with local politics on various islands matter? And should these advocacy organizations be trying? And if so, how should they be trying to engage in the politics of local communities?
I was muted, sorry. Here in Puerto Rico, advocacy groups fare better when there's a separation between them and the political parties. Since we're so politicized, if they associate in any way with a political party, it just everything goes to hell. So what local advocacy groups here do is that they approach, not like, they try to approach specific politicians from any party that have a specific connection to their specific cause. For example, I worked with a representative who was trying to create better programs for early education. So you had advocacy groups working through her, but her as an individual, not like any sort of political party, because that is an issue. And if they get identified with a specific political party, basically people stop supporting them. So it is a tight. They have to work a tight. There's a tight line they have to work there, trying to approach politicians, but not as individuals, not as members of the party. But really the most successful advocacy groups here try to approach the government, not try to let's see how I can explain this, try to make a mass movement out of it that it expresses a show of force. For example, the good example of this is the movement to remove the governor last summer. This was a movement that was completely organized through social media. There was no real leadership. There was no like real coalition of groups. Yes, there was a bunch of groups there, but it was basically mobilizing people to present a show of force to the government. And that's honestly, that's the most effective way advocacy groups here in Puerto Rico have had to use throughout history. For example, we had a huge Navy base in Vieques for years. Vieques is a small island off the shore of Puerto Rico. And the only way those advocacy groups were able to actually effect change was, once again, to take the streets and make a huge manifestation, which was actually the biggest one until last summer. So that's basically the way the advocacy groups have to engage with the government. It's more of an adversarial relationship, I guess. It's not like working with the government. It's like trying to show the government, here we are. These are the people that are with us, and push for change that way.
So I want to bring Alexa into this conversation on advocacy as well in Bermuda, and what the experience that you've seen in successful advocacy tactics to achieve policy or political change there.
Definitely. I mean, we have seen anything from, little protests and groups that really have things that they're passionate about that they think should be, laid at the feet of the government, to even more peaceful working documents circulated and kind of shared with the government for their consideration. I think in Bermuda, our government is definitely a, open doors head policy government insofar as it is not uncommon for you to come, and have a meeting with the leader or minister on a specific issue and see that issue either be resolved or shared with the person who would be the best person to deal with that issue. So I think for anyone that is, coming from an advocacy perspective, there are multiple working groups, there are multiple environments and segments within our government where these issues can be heard and considered. There are multiple boards for each ministry and each segment within government. And so it's really an easy and short power distance to get these things heard.
Yeah, I think any organization trying to make inroads into anywhere on the earth, even if it's in Eastern Europe, the point is to make governments listen, to sort of circumnavigate them and to go directly to the people, to build grassroots mechanisms and organizations that that propel your cause, and then to pursue legislative remedies. Like, politicians will seldom take action unless there's like a popular support for any particular issue. And I think, especially in this COVID environment where we're being forced to grapple with the new opportunities of the internet, that offers opportunities to take our message directly to the people and to make governments anywhere listen.
I would agree. No, I was just going to say I would agree to Victor's point on, using digital and using technology to kind of lay these interests and petitions to the feet of the government. We have seen maybe in the last 3 months multiple petitions and online forums being created and used as, these are the amount of people that we have that are supporting this issue, and therefore government, you should listen and you should take a keen interest in this.
I don't know if this is relevant, but since we're talking about democracy, I certainly think that these technological opportunities are finally going to offer, especially recently independent countries, not only in the Caribbean, but also in Eastern Europe, in Africa, that have, basically been handed these constitutions and haven't really tinkered with them much except for around the edges. We're going to start seeing a lot of these countries enter like the post-colonial phase of their existences and taking, democratic-esque formulations that I think will be crafted by their people with,
So with the desire to put some clash in this and the fact that Victor and I have been working together for over a decade and we often clash in a healthy way, I must say that, digital also has that potential for disruption. Like, we do see a lot of, in the Caribbean, fake news. We do see a lot of fake digital, very nasty, very personal attacks that not only happen on the political campaign stage, but also individual to individual. You see a lot of problems with the way the internet is used for harassment, with the way the internet is used for fake news, with the way the internet is used for coarsening the political dialogue as well. So, whereas, yes, it does have, potential to bring people together as we are in this summit, it also has potential to divide people. And we see this in, we're not just seeing this in, the big democracies, we're also seeing it in small democracies all over the world. But with that said, we do have another question from the audience, and I'm going to read it as is, which is, can you address the disturbing Chinese quote-unquote invasion in the Caribbean, please? If anybody wants to jump in on that and China's influence in the Caribbean, I'd love to hear it.
I noticed the pause. Here's what I'll say, and I think it's like common knowledge. Chinese is certainly, flexing its quasi-imperialist muscles and is taking a trajectory for global projection of power that is quite similar to the projection of power that America made after the Second World War. And how it's doing this is certainly allowing its state-run institutions do have significant financial impact on parts of the world, especially parts of the developing world. The fact of the matter is, if you want to call the Chinese incursion into small island development nations, you know, a negative, you have to view it from the perspective of those nations themselves, who are very much limited in their ability to affect the global financial markets, are very much limited by their real ability to craft policy, meaningful policy, policy that will positively impact and benefit their people without money and without help. And while, you know,
looks like Victor broke up there, but let me go
but
ahead. I want to make
go on that point as well. I think to carry on from Victor, I think this is nothing new for us. The Caribbean states have been from inception, where, you know, from almost thing under a European sphere of influence, followed by an American and North American sphere of influence, and now we're just looking for, you know, some support from somewhere else, as we've seen both the EU and North America kind of withdraw their support from us, apart from probably drug interdiction and money laundering help and things like that, terrorism and stuff. We've seen these islands looking around, and these are small islands looking for partners to do things. China has appeared to be a willing partner. Now, a lot of people are worried about what are the consequences of that, but it's no different from when the US was a willing partner post-World War in order to displace what they saw as the British empires, things like that, or even previous. So I think in terms of where this is going, we are small island states. We don't have, as Victor said, access to capital markets as much as you would. Benevolent, you know, large countries have always seemed to get involved in funding how we develop, and I think the Caribbean will always be open for that.
Yeah, I want to make a couple of points as well. You know, one of the interesting things about the Caribbean, and you know, I think this is true of the Pacific as well, is that you see the Taiwan-China divide. You have some, you know, islands are recognizing, and islands are leveraging that, right? You have some of the islands that recognize Taiwan as the government of China, others recognize the People's Republic of China as the government of China, and this actually creates that competition, actually creates more investment and development opportunities for various islands as they, you know, kind of flirt with each one, if you will. So I think that that's something, an important point to make as well. But, you know, that said, you know, there is a sense of, we sometimes see it in some of our qualitative research that we do in the region, you know, oh, China this, and, you know, things like that. But then as well, we'll see in qualitative research, people say, well, you know what, I had to go and get, you know, something fixed at my house. And I had a choice between a local contractor and a Chinese contractor. And you know what, I chose the Chinese contractor because I wanted to, you know, make sure it got done for under budget. So, you know, you do hear these kinds of, there is that, you know, sense of national pride, but also, you know, the economic imperative is also something that pulls at people.
But there's also a cultural aspect, which I think flies in the face of most doomsday people in American. Truth is the fact that the Caribbean has much more in common culturally and in terms of like blood relations with America than they do today. When there's a vacuum of financial investment, Caribbean countries will have to make hard decisions as to how they will be able to put bread on the tables of their people.
Yeah. So we have, you know, time, I think, for one other question if someone wants to pop it in into the chats here. Oh, we do have one here. How is international organization influence in the democracy in small island states? I think that there was, Victor was speaking to the Guyanese example, where you had, you know, literally 6 different observer groups. You had the Organization of American States, CARICOM, the Commonwealth, you had the Carter Center, and I think one or two others that I'm probably forgetting right now. And their reports and their findings were really important in terms of ensuring that the democracy was protected in that country. But you also see it, a number of countries do have a fair number of observer missions that will come in and observe the elections. And one of the things, though, at least in the Caribbean, is that you do have a strong democratic tradition, and you do have a history of transitions of power. And that's one thing I think that the region should be proud of. And the way the institutions stood up as well in Guyana, I think, is an important example. But I think those are some of the international influences. That said, the World Bank, the IMF on the economic front play a massive role in terms of putting islands on IMF programs and forcing down certain, shall we say, budgetary decisions onto island states. And I think Javon
and the
Barbados,
WTO.
Yeah, and the WTO. And Jevan, I know in Barbados just entered an IMF thing. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and IMF recently just virtually reported on about last week. And again, they said that despite the challenges that Barbados was facing, that the IMF were giving us a passing mark. Unfortunately, as I say, some of the other rating agencies have not. But I think in terms of, we can talk about the financial ones, but also some of the social ones in terms of the UN ones or the PAHOs and stuff as well, particularly under COVID, where we've been able to draw on resources that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to draw on, and expertise that we don't have. And so I think it's not only in protection of democracy and protection of economies, but right through it in terms of social infrastructure, in terms of health infrastructure, that we've had a strong tradition of leaning on these international organizations for expertise that we probably couldn't afford. And I think in terms of that, it's that we have traditionally held strong with them.
All right. Well, I think that I think we're about out of time. So I just wanted to thank do a whole bunch of thank yous. Thank you to Alexa, Pedro, Javon, Victor, and of course James and the entire Island Innovation team. I want to encourage everybody to learn more about 303.digital, red advertising and marketing. Of course, the Bermuda Progressive Labor Party, but also our firm BuzzMaker. You can learn more about us again at buzzmaker.net. We also are in the virtual sponsor thing. I think it's I cannot remember the words, but
the virtual expo.
Virtual Expo, that's it. So if anybody wants to talk more, Victor and I are going to be in the Virtual Expo at our times over the next couple of days, and we're looking forward to engaging you, especially if you have issue advocacy, political campaign, public affairs, government relations needs. We would love to talk to you. So James, do you want to say anything final?
No, that's it, Matt. You have more time if you want it, but otherwise you can wrap up. Thank you for the great discussion.
Okay, thanks everybody. I think we're
Thank you.
good. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.